show of hands in the room, how many of you today took medication? Raise your hand. And of those same hands, how many of you today took medication to treat a mental health condition? The proud one, well done. Look around the room though. There's one hand up. One. Why? Stigma? If stigma lives in this room, it lives on your ships.
Last March of 2020, several guests died, including a fellow crew, and a significant count of guests and crew got sick. And I was in a leadership role back then, so you could imagine the amount of work that the situation has imposed on all of us. Workload was an understatement. It even came to a point when I was left alone with one staff to run the office because the others got sick and were placed in isolation. After about 14 days from the onset of the situation, our company was successful in identifying ways to send our guests home. When all guests have disembarked, crew members went to isolation to complete the safety protocols. When I got into isolation, this is when I noticed the changes in me. I had sleepless nights. I had nightmares every single night. I lost my appetite. I could not focus on my work, and I just felt the COVID scare. This is when I made one of the biggest decisions in my life. I decided to speak up and ask for help. I opened up to my immediate superior and admitted that there was something wrong with me. My immediate superior reciprocated to my admittance and got the ball rolling. Arranged for my disembarkation as soon as possible. But while waiting for my homebound flight, and while the whole world was paralyzed by COVID, I told myself I have to find ways. So I searched for some coping mechanisms via Google. No professional help during that time. Finally, my flight was booked amidst all the border closures. When I got home, I headed straight to seek medical help. I was diagnosed of acute anxiety stress disorder that led to post-traumatic stress disorder. I subjected myself to a 1-year treatment. After then, I was taken off the medication. I was declared fit for sea duty by a doctor who is affiliated with our third-party medical facility here in the Philippines. I said, wow, finally. So I received my vessel assignment, and then I went to the pre-employment medical requirements. When I followed up on the results of my medical exam, I was told this time that I am not fit to work, and I have to wait for 2 more years at home for stability reasons. This is on top of the 1-year treatment that I had to go through. That was it. Nothing further was explained. So can you imagine how I felt during that time? So I moved on. But you know, I had a question in mind, and up until now, I'm in dire need of an answer. Are there measures in between those 2 years that I'll be waiting? Because I can tell you, up until now, no one has followed up with me. And let me just emphasize this, that my employer has been very supportive of my situation and provided me the medical care that I needed. But if there is a regulation that covers my situation, how do we align this with encouraging people to speak up when they feel that something is wrong with them? And then what happens when they do? Their employment can potentially be at stake. Thank you.
There are lots of stressors in the lives of seafarers. There are stressors which are related to the job itself, stressors that are related to home, and there are stressors which are related to the self, and stressors which are related to the people you're working with on board. However, in the case that I have just heard right now from Rencel's story, we're hearing the dimension from the COVID-19 pandemic. There was this traumatic event, and a traumatic event leads to certain mental health conditions, and in her case, it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. In a study that has been conducted, and it has been published in BMC Journal this year, among 439 respondents, multinational seafarers, what did they discover? They discovered that anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder were present among a certain percentage of seafarers. The question is, how many percent among those seafarers suffer from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder? For anxiety, it's 12%. For depression, it's 14%. And for post-traumatic stress disorder, just like what she had experienced, it's 37%. Which means that, yes, this may be a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. And what happened to her, when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, you experience different kinds of signs and symptoms, like 1, intrusiveness. So she keeps on thinking about the traumatic event, about people dying. Number 2, she had hypervigilance as well, and she was always on the lookout what is going to happen next in my ship. The third one is avoidance, and that's something that she had somehow experienced, plus the mood alterations. Now, all of these stressors and signs and symptoms that she had experienced, well, she did something. The good thing about Rencel is that she was solution-focused. She knew what to do. She had to get help. However, there are no protocols regarding mental health conditions. Unlike when somebody has a heart attack, we know we have to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Somebody is choking. So you have to somehow use Heimlich maneuver. But what do we do when somebody experiences depression? What do we say when someone has post-traumatic stress disorder? What do we tell our crewmates? What do we tell the people we're with when they experience mental health conditions? So there's a need for protocol. There's a need for everyone to learn more about how we deal with mental health conditions. And as I've said earlier, Rencel was solution-focused. She told herself, I need help. And so she got the help that she needed. And she was repatriated and returned home. And after a year, she recovered with the medication and therapy. However, after a year, well, she was already fit to work according to the psychiatrist. However, it was not granted. Hence, we can see here that there is a disconnect between what the psychiatrist has stated that she is fit to work and what the industry may be telling that she's not yet fit to work. We had to wait for another 2 years. In total, that's 3 years. This is stigma. This means that there is a need for us to talk more about mental health conditions. And this is a challenge to all of us to finally come up with protocols that somehow will help each and every one of us to address such kind of situations. As I speak right now, somebody is experiencing depression. 300 million people suffer from depression worldwide. And as I speak, somebody is dying by suicide. After 40 seconds, somebody else is going to die by suicide. After another 40 seconds, somebody else is going to die by suicide. Depression is the enemy. And the only way we can fight the enemy is to know the enemy. And the only way that we can defeat the opponent is to reduce the stigma, to talk about it, just like what we're doing right now. So this case, what Rencel had experienced, is instrumental in order for us to open our eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And Amy, With Rencel's story, tell me about possible solutions but barriers from what she just described.
So there is regulatory bodies that we all have to abide by. And one of them is, in terms of medical examinations, is the MLC guidelines on medical examination for seafarers, which is endorsed by ILO, IMO, and SCCW. The guidelines are intended to provide an internationally recognized criteria. Ultimately, these guidelines are to protect the seafarer as well as to protect the health and safety at sea. These are also helpful to physicians who are doing the pre-employment medical examinations to understand what the limitations would be on board a vessel, because not all land-based physicians have seafarer experience as well. Now, although they're helpful in their guidelines, there is restrictions on these criteria, and these restrictions that are adherence is under mental, cognitive, and behavioral disorders. Under that section, the recommendation is either based on assessment on case-to-case basis. It is also based on whether someone is on medication or not, whether they're undergoing treatment or not. And there is a restriction on how long this person is to be at home without a relapse in symptoms, and this is varies between 1 to 5 years. Now, this impacts the seafarer, like Rencel's case. It also impacts the employing company, and as well as the vessel safety. Currently, throughout the industry, there is a reluctance for a further review process in Rencel's case, where she was not then further reviewed based on her situation, which was, like we all know, the pandemic was an abnormal, very abnormal situation for the maritime industry. So there needs to be more review processes, such as what we do at VIKAND, where we review PEMIs constantly all the time. And in these particular cases, where mental health issues are not necessarily straightforward, like Michael said, they're not straightforward and can be reviewed on a case-to-case basis and can be situational. There needs to be work on how crew members are educated on how to speak up, what to say, that they're not in a position where they are put back at home and not being able to work. They don't have to use words such as depressed or I want to kill myself, when actually they are under stress, they're anxious, and can be helped on board the vessel without having to go home. So the terminology starts with companies, pre-employment medical examiners, as well as awareness to crew members when there is a problem.
I think the first thing I do want to say is I want to praise the industry because during the height of the pandemic, there didn't seem to be a week that went by when new mental health resources were being put out, when a new telephone helpline was being instituted, and there was suddenly a much more active vocabulary around mental health, and I think that was a great thing. The challenge is ensuring that that continues. One of the things that we're seeing in our port chaplaincies around the world in 200 ports across 50 countries is that seafarers are now increasingly telling us that some of those resources which they really valued during the pandemic are now being taken away. And they're worried about that. And of course, I would expect that that's probably a cost issue. But if there are members in this audience today who are responsible for those decisions, and if that is indeed happening, we would certainly encourage you to review that. Because not only is there, a business case for ensuring that your seafarers are properly protected, there's also the moral case, because we are talking about real people, just like you and me, with families, with lives, with difficulties, everyday issues which are exacerbated by being at sea. And certainly we have an obligation to support them. There are, though, 3 wider barriers that we have seen. And I think the first, it's already been touched on today in a couple of panels, is that seafarers need to have agency. One of the most frequent comments that we get in the Seafarers Happiness Index runs along the lines of, I don't think anybody ashore is listening to me. So making seafarers feel valued, making them feel seen and heard should absolutely be a top priority for all of us. Seafarers need to be part of developing these resources so that they feel that the material is being created in a way which connects to them and is being done so in a relevant way. We also know that seafarers will sometimes talk to us and our welfare teams in ways that perhaps they won't talk to their employers. So we need to be talking to each other, we need to be engaging with each other to act as that information flow. The second of the three barriers is the cultural aspect. There are many great resources that are being out there that have been put out. Some of them, though, do need to be Marinaized, for want of a better term. We're also dealing with many different cultures, as we know, where mental health is viewed very differently. Everybody is starting at a different point. So when we created material, for example, around managing trauma in response to the war in Ukraine, we sought experts who have intensive knowledge about the stigma that mental health is held in both Ukraine and Russia, and then used nuanced language to try and downplay any fears. The third, and I think often one of the most overlooked barriers, is that we need to see seafarers' families as part of the solution when developing mental health programs for seafarers. Their families are as connected to this industry as the seafarers themselves, because of the sacrifice that they make of being prepared to live for long periods of time without their loved ones. So ensuring that seafarers' families are properly taken care of does, we believe, lessen the amount of stress that seafarers experience when they're away, because they're less likely to be pressurized to find solutions from those when they're so many miles away. So giving seafarers agency, making space which is safe and inclusive, respecting and responding to boundaries, and taking families on this journey. They're not going to solve the issue straight away, but they certainly are going to go some way, we believe, to helping the frameworks to be created to let seafarers thrive.
The name Careful Sea, a lot of people ask me, what does the C stand for? Obviously, it sounds like the word sea, but there are a lot of words that begin with C that have been used today. And for me, communication is the most important thing. We really need to bridge the gap between ship and shore, because I agree with a lot of things that have been said today. People don't feel like they're being listened to. And I was in a position which I had a direct link to the shore side, but that is not available for many people. And any solution in this room that provides either a direct or indirect improvement in communication, for me, is a step in the right direction. Also, it's the language that we use. We need to be able to communicate with people in a way that they feel that they will be supported and not reprimanded when something does happen, because that stigma is about, and it's concerning. The next C is the company, and when we think of the company, they're thinking about their costs. I think everyone in this room needs to become united in convincing the unconvinced that it is a worthwhile investment in mental health, as much as it would be for mechanical improvement on the ship. It may not be as tangible as knowing an X% reduction in fuel efficiency, but I really truly believe that an investment in mental health will have untold gains. Now, when I speak to a lot of companies, they're not really too sure what to do, and not every situation is the same. So we've had a lot of incidences where companies go gung-ho and they realize that actually that didn't work for me, so I'm not going to try it again. I'm not going to do it again. Well, that's not necessarily the right thing to do. Take that first step and then learn from it. Whatever you do is not going to be wrong, but you learn from it. And then the last C, the most important one, which is crew. The conditions on the vessels when communication and all these things improve will definitely improve. In Greece, at least where I know the seafarer pool, we're starting to lose a lot of our seafarers. They finish their cadetships and their eyes are already looking to shore. And it's very difficult now to find good quality seafarers. And it's quite rightly so. They're looking at their counterparts ashore and they're thinking, well, they have all of these things available to them and we're really lagging behind now. So I really urge people in this room to consider looking at the first steps for improving mental health on their vessels. Now, I can feel the passion in the room, and that needs to be translated into real action. My door is genuinely always open. I'm willing to provide support because I sympathize with many owners and operators who are not too sure what to do in their first instances. So I urge you, make that first step, and if you've already made that first step, then take the next one. It should not be accepted or tolerated anymore just to kind of put things under the carpet.